So I'm full of these little secrets that you don't know about me yet. One of them is that I am a reluctant medium. I want to tell you more stories about the fascinating people on the ship. I had promised to talk about the one who figured out a way to turn piles and piles of garbage into piles and piles of money, which was my buddy Gus. But I'm hearing this loud banging at the door from a different friend of mine from the ship. And so I am agreeing to share his story first because for some reason it seems to be important to him. So I'm going to tell you today the story of my friend Leonard. And by the way, I'm proud to have called myself his friend. You'll hear why. Leonard grew up in England, middle-class household, was conscribed into the armed forces to serve his period of time. He worked his way up to being a sergeant. He, as a sergeant, took 3 other men with him and were off on a reconnaissance sort of assignment, as he explained it to me. They came across a concentration camp, Bergen-Belsen. They were the first 4 people to arrive at that godforsaken place after it was abandoned by the Nazis. What they found was difficult to wrap your mind around. I know we've all heard stories, we've all seen horrific pictures, but to hear from this man's lips what he found, what he did, and the result of that is again unbearable. They arrived, people were starving, people were dying of thirst, crawling at them, trying to get their attention and get some help. So of course, my friend Leonard, being the kind soul that he was, immediately told the other 3 men who were with him to try to find the ones who were in the worst shape, and let's give them our rations, what food we brought with us, what water we brought with us. Meanwhile, I'll call for help. And there's a hospital nearby that was also abandoned where we can get some more supplies, but let's start with the ones that need to be saved now. I understand that thinking completely, and I'm sure that any of you in that circumstance would have given whatever you had. So he took the water, he took the little bits of food that they had and gave it to the ones who seemed to be most needy in hopes that they could save their lives until more help could come. But unfortunately, the opposite happened because these people had been without food and without water for so long that their systems could not handle it. And in fact, being given water by the cup instead of by the drop, and being given food to eat that may not have been easily digestible, their systems couldn't take it. And right in front of his eyes, as they took the water from him, they died. One can only begin to imagine the horror that he felt and the responsibility that he felt. Although all of us understand why he did what he did, but the result was the antithesis of what he was trying to do. So help did come. The people who came were doctors and nurses who understood that you can't just give a starving man a cheeseburger. Tiniest bit of maybe the bread would have given his system something to work on. But anyway, I don't want to dwell on the intricacies of this horrendous scene, but it was very difficult for him. He did get out of the army and found it difficult to find a job, even having been a decorated soldier and the hero of many of those people in that concentration camp, because he called for help and help came and help knew what to do, but he couldn't find a job. He hadn't been trained. He'd been in the armed services for his country for a few years and was a very young man before that. So he was really fresh out of school and hadn't really held a significant job. So he started drinking because he didn't know how to handle the situation he found himself in. And on one of the nights that he went into a local pub, a man sat next to him and said, "Why are you drinking like that? I can tell just by the way you're handling the glass. This is not something that you're doing just socially. What is the matter?" And Leonard started to tell the story. And the man said, "Come with me. I own a women's clothing manufacturing company. I will give you a job. Leonard, who knew nothing about clothing manufacturing, absolutely was thrilled to have anybody offer him a job to do something that wasn't illegal. And next morning, he showed up at the factory. He worked there for several years, and he actually, because he was not only kind, but he was brilliant, introduced the assembly line to the UK, and it made his boss a fortune. The boss shared with Leonard. They built a huge company, were tremendously successful. Leonard took his money and moved to Spain, where he lived for a number of years very happily. He invested his money and became a very wealthy man. I love stories that have a problem. The person realizes the problem, says, what do I have to do to fix it? He's given an opportunity, knew nothing about it, knew he could learn on the job. Where have you heard this story before? And was a tremendous success. Made money for himself, made money for his boss, for all the people who worked there, because he was able to hire more people to be on this assembly line. It was an absolute crowning win for everybody involved. And it had started out as a piece of mercy and a thank you to a very young man who had given many years of his life and done such heroic things. So the story could have ended there and been a lovely story, and it would have taught the lesson that I keep sharing with you over and over again. But his story went far beyond that. Leonard was one of the few people who actually lived on this beautiful ship. He lived in a place in Spain, in Puerto Banús, decided to sell everything that he had, including his Rolls Royce, and moved onto this ship, where he decided he was going to live out the rest of his life, because it allowed him to continue to travel in a way that was manageable for someone who was aging and who did have some physical issues. He had a pacemaker when he came on the ship, but he took good care of himself and took whatever medications were necessary to keep himself as fit and healthy as he could. Worked out in the gym, at the pool, and walked and biked. And he was just an absolute delight. He always teased me because we would want to have dinner at a rather early time, 6:30 or so. And Leonard would always say, oh, I'd love to join you, darling. Are you inviting me for tea? Because in Spain, they don't eat dinner until 10 o'clock at night. So for me to call and say, would you join us at 6:30? It was a good assumption that it was for tea. But obviously it was him poking me to point out the fact that I was not very sophisticated and didn't know how things were supposed to be done. But always with that twinkle in the eye and the big smile, and rarely said no to our invitation. He always had stories to tell, always had good things to say, and he was actually a joy to be around. But as I told you, the ship is a dream until it becomes a nightmare. And in his case, it became a nightmare. The ship was off in some strange island place near Papua New Guinea, and we were all just on board, having gotten off, those who wanted to. It wasn't my cup of tea, so I just stayed home in my apartment. But Leonard started feeling unwell, and this was very unusual for him. So our medic made some phone calls and was told that there was a hospital nearby that they could take him to by our small little tender, which we used to go ashore when it was required. And so our medic nurse took Leonard in this small boat to this island that they were told about that would have a facility that could care for whatever he needed for his heart. They were told it was only probably 20 minutes by little boat to get to this part of the island. They just accompanied him, went off in this boat, didn't even take extra water, and realized that it was a lot further than they thought. Leonard started to feel a little bit dehydrated, which was causing some cramping. It was causing some dizziness. Everyone started to get really worried. Finally, they did see in the distance this island that was described. Off they went, and found that facility that was described to them was nothing like what they had hoped for. It didn't even have running water. There were doctors and there were nurses, and they tried to help as Leonard's heart gave out. So here is our hero who deserved a military burial and to be thanked by all of the Jewish people who in fact had been rescued by him. And this was to be his end, in some forlorn hospital on an island where the people didn't speak English and had no running water. Our medic and our nurse did everything they could. They called for help, and help showed up too late. Our hero was brought back to the boat and helicoptered out. Complete nightmare for this incredible hero, not the way it should have ended. I love you to this day, Leonard, and I know now you're with God. You're going to get your just reward. Leonard took on the cause while he was on the ship of the Jewish people. I'm sure that that was based on his experience at Bergen-Belsen. But he would go every year for Holocaust Remembrance Day, and he would fly from wherever the ship was to some place where one of the people on the ship who was Jewish, and there were many, would organize a reception for him, and he would give a speech and show pictures that he had taken himself of Bergen-Belsen and pled for unity in the world and understanding, and for everyone to love each other and to stop the hate and to stop the war. But he repeated this theme over and over again for the number of years he was on the ship until this disaster hit. I was lucky enough to be at one of those presentations. And at the end, he said, "Are there any questions?" And there was one old man in a wheelchair who just gingerly raised his hand. Leonard, of course, said, "Yes, sir, what can I answer for you?" And the man said, "There is no answer I'm looking for. I just want you to know that I was one of the people in Bergen-Belsen who you saved, and I'm here to thank you." So you see, he did get his just reward because he was reminded again what a hero he is to so many people. I assure you, not a day goes by that is dedicated to the remembrance, to never forgetting the atrocities of World War II. I am forever grateful this man and all the other men who did similar things when given the opportunity, who showed their love, who showed their respect for people who were not probably the same religion, who weren't from the same country, who didn't speak the same language. But he knew that we are all one. We are all brothers and sisters and needed to be treated that way. God bless you, Leonard. So besides being a very personal story for me because of the influence Leonard inspired in my life, I really want to encourage you to thank those people in your life who have done things or said things that have changed your life and that have reminded you of the inherent goodness of people. Left to their own devices, I still believe people will do good if given the opportunity. So let's not forget our thank yous and our hugs and just the thoughts of all of those people in our lives who have done heroic things, which may have seemed like little things at the time. They're the ones who were by your side when things looked bleak. They're the ones who picked up the phone when you needed to hear a friendly voice. They're the ones who remind you of your own greatness and your own goodness. Let's not forget them. Never forget.